He didn't wake up one day and feel weak. It happened slowly, in the name of love, in the name of being a good man. One quiet sacrifice at a time. He stopped speaking up to keep the peace. He gave more than he had, thinking it would save the marriage. He stayed, even when it hollowed him out. And somewhere along the line he looked in the mirror and couldn't recognize the man staring back. This isn't about blaming her. This is about why married men, over time, lose the most sacred thing they own, their self-respect. If you've ever silenced your own needs to avoid conflict, leave a quiet comment. Losing myself wasn't love. It was surrender. These aren't just reasons. They're quiet betrayals that happen in the name of love. 1. He stops leading just to keep the peace. In the beginning, he leads with vision, direction, purpose. But over time, if every decision turns into a debate, he stops offering. He learns that silence equals survival. He lets her choose the restaurant, the vacation, even how the kids are disciplined. Not because he agrees, but because disagreement brings tension. And that's when it starts. When he trades leadership for tolerance, clarity for compliance. She may call him passive, but she trained him that way by punishing every time he spoke up. This isn't partnership. It's quiet erasure. 2. He apologizes for his masculinity. At some point, being direct becomes rude. Being stoic becomes emotionally unavailable. Working hard becomes neglectful. He begins to shrink himself, soften his voice, hesitate before speaking, second-guess his own instincts. He doesn't want to seem controlling, toxic, outdated. So he overcorrects and disappears. He becomes a version of himself that walks on eggshells. And the more he dims, the more she loses respect. Not because he's mean, but because he's not grounded anymore. He's no longer the man who owns his space. He's performing politeness while quietly resenting the cost. 3. He feels like a provider, not a partner. He works, he pays, he provides. But he's not seen. He's not heard. Somewhere, the gratitude faded. The simple thank you turned into expectations. She doesn't ask, she demands. And when he speaks about feeling unappreciated, he's met with, "You're supposed to do that." That's when the dignity fades. Not because he minds giving, but because he feels invisible while doing it. He's not angry, he's exhausted. And exhaustion kills confidence faster than failure ever could. 4. He gives up his boundaries in the name of love. It starts with little things. He lets things slide to avoid conflict. She's upset. He backs off. She wants control. He lets her lead. She criticizes his tone, his friends, his way of decompressing, and he adjusts. Again and again. At first, it looks like compromise, but deep down, it's self-erasure. He stops going to the gym because she mocks it. He gives up his weekend hobby because family comes first. He deletes messages from old friends to avoid drama. But each time he says yes, when his soul says no, he trades a piece of his dignity. Eventually, he doesn't recognize what he stands for anymore because he hasn't stood up in a long time. Boundaries aren't walls, they're dignity lines. And when a man stops defending those lines to keep her happy, what he's really doing is letting himself disappear. 5. He performs instead of being. At some point in marriage, many men stop being themselves and start playing a role. The smiling husband, the fixer, the buffer between the wife's moods and the rest of the world. He becomes who she wants him to be, not who he really is. He learns how to answer without causing an argument, how to check in even when he needs space, how to flatter, agree, absorb instead of lead, express or confront. And over time, he becomes exhausted. Because no matter how good he is at the role, he knows it's not him. He's not being loved for who he is, just for how well he performs. And the irony? The better he performs, the more invisible he becomes. A man can only pretend so long before his spirit starts to rot. Love, without room to be authentic, is just stage work, and he's tired of acting in his own home. 6. He accepts disrespect as normal. The jabs start softly. A sarcastic tone, an eye roll, a comment about how real men don't act like that. At first he brushes it off. She's just having a bad day. But soon, the disrespect becomes routine. She talks over him, corrects him in front of others, questions his judgment like it's sport. And the worst part? He stops reacting, not because it doesn't hurt, but because he's grown numb. He tells himself, this is just how it is. He makes excuses. At least she's loyal. She's just stressed. But every time he swallows his voice, he reinforces the lie that his dignity is negotiable. Disrespect doesn't have to be physical to do damage. Sometimes, the most painful wounds are the ones that cut you in front of others with a laugh while you smile through it to keep the peace. A man loses his self-respect The moment he convinces himself that being tolerated is the same as being valued. And that moment comes quietly, almost always with a smile. 7. He trades truth for peace until he forgets his voice. At first, he told the truth because it mattered, because honesty was the backbone of how he loved. He said things like, "I don't feel respected when you talk to me like that. I need time to myself today. I disagree with how we're raising the kids." Not to provoke, not to hurt, but to be real. And then came the resistance. The shift in energy, the pushback. Maybe she cried. Maybe she shut down. Maybe she turned the room cold for days. And he learned not by logic, but by survival that the truth had a cost. So, next time, he softened it, then watered it down, then buried it. Instead of "I don't agree," he said, "Whatever works." Instead of "This matters to me," he said nothing at all. And what started as a strategy became a habit. And that habit became a prison. Because here's the truth about truth. If you don't use your voice, you forget what it sounds like. If you don't honor your own needs, you begin to believe you don't have any. He used to be a man of conviction. Now, he's just agreeable, safe, accommodating, but hollow. He thinks he's keeping the peace, but the real peace, it left the day his truth stopped having a place at the table. And when a man gives up his voice to avoid conflict, he doesn't just lose the argument, he loses himself. 8. He's rewarded for compliance, not strength. Masculinity, in its truest form, is not aggression. It's not domination. It's structure, direction, grounded presence. But in some marriages, that strength is seen as a threat. She doesn't trust it. She pushes back against it, not because it's wrong, but because she learned to fear male leadership instead of cherish it. So when he sets a boundary, she accuses him of being rigid. When he makes a decision, she calls him controlling. When he asserts a need, she calls it selfish. So what does he do? He adapts. He softens. He tones himself down. And the moment he does, she smiles again. She's sweet again. She gives him warmth again. Not because she respects him, but because he stopped challenging her. And that becomes the pattern. His passivity gets praised. His boldness gets punished. But what no one tells him is this. A woman may appreciate a compliant man for a moment, but deep down, she loses respect for him. Because if he can't hold his own center, how can he hold her when life gets real? A man who trades his backbone for approval will always live beneath himself, and he knows it, which is why he starts to quietly resent the very woman he's trying to please. Not because she asked for his surrender, but because he gave it too easily. And now, he's not leading. He's not guiding. He's managing moods and begging for harmony. That's not partnership. That's slow-motion self-erasure. 9. He loses his mission and makes her his purpose. Every man is built to move towards something. A dream, a project, a calling. Even if it's quiet, even if it's not grand, he needs a direction. But when a marriage becomes turbulent, he starts redirecting that drive. He stops building his business, stops reading the books that used to light him up, stops pushing toward his deeper goals. Why? Because her emotional weather becomes the new horizon. He stops asking, "What am I meant to build in this life?" and starts asking, "How do I keep her happy today?" She cries. It pivots. She withdraws. He adjusts. She disapproves. He rewrites himself. His entire identity becomes wrapped around her comfort. At first, she may love the attention, the focus, the devotion, but eventually, it becomes suffocating, because no woman wants to be a man's entire mission. It's too much weight, too much pressure, too much dependence. And when she pulls away even slightly, he panics, because now he's disconnected from his one compass and has nothing else to orient him. This isn't love. This is identity collapse. A man who loses his mission doesn't just feel lost. He becomes reactive, needy, insecure, unsteady. She doesn't have to walk away. He's already walked away from the man he used to be. And until he reclaims that purpose, that thing that belongs only to him, he'll never feel whole in any relationship. 10. He accepts emotional withholding as normal. It doesn't happen overnight, but one day he notices she doesn't look at him the same. No more warm greetings at the door. No more subtle touches in passing. No more, "I missed you today." He shrugs it off. "We're just tired. It's just a busy season." This is what happens in long marriages. But that season never ends. Intimacy turns into obligation. Affection becomes rare. And conversation sounds more like logistics than love. He starts reaching, but she pulls away. He initiates, but gets silence. So he adapts. He stops trying. He stops needing. And on the outside, it looks like peace. But inside, it's quiet starvation. Because a man doesn't just need closeness for physical reasons. He needs it for recognition, to feel wanted, to feel chosen. And when that disappears, when the most intimate space in his life goes cold, he stops asking for warmth and starts convincing himself he doesn't need it. He jokes with the guys. It's just marriage, right? But deep down, he knows this isn't love. It's cohabitation. It's survival. It's two people sharing a roof but not a rhythm. And worst of all, he begins to believe he's not worth loving in that way anymore. That's the silent heartbreak. Not rejection, but indifference. 11. He numbs himself to stay married. It starts with tuning out just a little, scrolling through his phone more often, spending longer in the garage, turning the television on during dinner just to avoid awkward silence. He doesn't want to fight, doesn't want to argue, doesn't want to feel, because feeling means facing the truth, that he's not happy, that he's not himself, that this isn't working. So he numbs. Not with alcohol, not with rage, but with disconnection. He goes through the motions, pays the bills, does the errands, smiles at her parents. But behind his eyes, he's elsewhere, because being present hurts too much. Being honest might destroy what's left. So he becomes neutral, not angry, not joyful, just flat. He tells himself it's maturity, that he's riding it out, but what he's really doing is disappearing. And here's the tragedy. No one notices. Not her, not the kids, not even himself after a while. Because numbness is quiet. It doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it just erodes. Until one day, he wakes up in a life that feels borrowed, and a body that no longer feels like home. 12. He stays long after the respect is gone. There's a moment every man faces when he knows it's over. But he stays, not because he's still in love, not because there's still something sacred, but because leaving feels too big, too risky, too shameful. So he stays. In the cold house, in the passionless bedroom, in the long silences that used to be filled with laughter. He tells himself he's doing it for the kids, or the mortgage, or to be a man of his word. But deep down, he knows he's betraying the one thing he has left, his truth. Because staying in a place where there is no admiration, no affection, no mutual purpose, isn't loyalty. It's abandonment of self, of soul, of spirit. And he starts to feel it, the weight in his chest, the quiet dread before walking through the door, the way his shoulders tense when she enters the room. He's not angry. He's not even sad anymore. He's just gone. And no one had to kick him out. He just stopped existing slowly, silently, in a life where he was no longer seen. That's not marriage. That's quiet resignation. And every day he stays, he teaches himself that respect for who he truly is a luxury he'll never earn again. Self-respect doesn't vanish in a day. It fades with every swallowed word, every silenced instinct, every moment a man chooses to betray himself to be accepted. Marriage can be beautiful, but not when it demands your silence. Not when it costs you your masculinity, your mission, or your voice. If you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered where you went, this video was for you. Leave a comment if this spoke to your soul. I didn't lose love. I lost myself. But I'm coming back. Because real love, the kind worth keeping, never asks a man to disappear.